Well, hello, friends, and welcome to Ruminations on Tony's Tall Tales. I'm your host, Anthony Pavelich. Thank you for tuning in. Tony's Tall Tales is one of many shows under the Ruminations Radio Network, and I highly encourage you to review the rest of the great content at ruminationsradionetwork.com. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, co-host of one of those shows, and part of the trouble of Rumination Radio Network's very own Brevity Box, Triple C. Welcome,
Hey,
sir. How are you
man.
today?
Thank you. Doing good. Excited to be here. Excited to talk to you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, cool,
Actually,
man.
have I been? I think I've been one time.
I think it's been the one time. I think
Yes.
when we talked about Bond, I think it might have been like the second sort of,
That's
one of
right.
the early chapters.
So it's a follow-up.
Yeah, it's a follow-up.
Part 2, 1 year later.
Dose. But yeah, how are you? How is the Brevity Box? You wanna plug the show for a
Sure,
little bit?
I'll plug a little BBX. BBX has done really good. Brevity Box is for anybody of your listeners who doesn't know, we are a podcast of essentially we're hot takes on any given subject matter of the day. We recently covered the Will Smith slap at the Oscars and had some differing perspectives on it. And typically we rely on my other two co-hosts, which are Becky with the good hair and Brando, who actually I need to announce to everybody that Brando will be taking a step away from being a host. I know it's devastating, but he is a incredible personality, and we've got 56 or 57 episodes of Brando's, just his style and his feedback, and he's a brother and a family member for me. Love the guy.
Yeah.
So we cover pretty much everything. It's a lot of casual conversation. We don't stick on one topic. So we might talk sports, we might talk food, we might talk current events, we might talk politics. Check it out. We're on the website along with a lot of other really entertaining content. And I'll plug the website at www.ruminationsradionetwork.com. Go there, check us out, pick one. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's such a great show, and you
Thanks.
I really appreciate how you guys have been just banging out the content. You and Cinephile Hissy Fit, man. I mean,
I
everybody.
admire those guys so much, man.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has been doing a great job of just pushing out the content. I feel like I'm always inspired to, like, man, I gotta keep doing more because you guys are all leaving me in the dust. And
Well, you've got a you're actually doing like I can't say Brevity Box does the same kind of heavy lifting that Tony's Tall Tales does, so I'm not going to claim it's the same. Your content is so much more. It's a learning experience. Every episode is meaty, and
thanks, man.
I think we're really much more drive time to work kind of content. Or I'm chopping onions, I want to listen to something funny. It's not the same.
Well, and I found you guys, I found when Becky came on, like, such a great, I don't know, just great dynamic between the three of you, and it's been very enjoyable. It's been sad to, like, that she's been, she was down for the count for a little bit, but it was cool to hear some of the revolving guest door. You had Mitch on, you had a couple other people on. It was cool for them to.
And we're going to be doing that for a little bit until we find another person to fit into that third seat. We're looking for a little bit of that same chemistry. Becky's amazing. And I think the thing is, it's good to have, people who are professionals and take what they do seriously, but don't take themselves that seriously.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, if I had to narrow it down to what our show is, it's people who have really well-developed opinions and they do serious work. Becky's a NICU nurse about to be a neonatal specialist, and Brando does a professional work, which I won't mention by his request. And I've done a lot of the same thing, but we're all able to take criticism and joke about ourselves and laugh at ourselves. And I think that's what makes it work. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to find that, in a third party. Right. So finding somebody that works with that is going to be a tricky situation, but we'll find
Yeah.
them. And until then, we've got some good people to sit in. You know, I mean, this is going to lead to an invite for you to come onto the show
Oh,
and have it be a you in that chair, because we're going to have to fill that content. And the last episode we had with you on was just fun and interesting and amazing, and I just enjoyed talking to you, which is why I was
thanks.
excited to come back here.
Yeah, me as well, man. And it was cool too because today I know I know it's been a while, and this isn't going to be a typical movie review because obviously we've got the Cinephile History Fit guys that just do such a fantastic job on formal and true movie reviews. But it was just more of an informal because I know you're a big Bond fan, and I've been wanting to talk about this film for a bit. Obviously with some of the things that I've been talking about with on the show. Um, but yeah, man. So like first takes, we're going to talk about No Time to Die, the latest James Bond film that came out in 2021 after much delay and
Much delay.
yeah, which was really crazy to think, or, review and think about. Man, yeah, that was supposed to be out a while ago and had to sit on the shelf for a little bit because the pandy. Um,
Well, can I point out that that's a fascinating thing about this movie for me? You know,
okay.
I think from a almost from the writing perspective, I wondered from the moment that I started putting together some of what the plot was around,
Mm,
that, because you wonder why movies get delayed, and movies
yeah,
get delayed by all kinds of different time frames. A month, we're moving it to fall from spring.
yeah,
This was years,
yeah,
and I didn't know. I had no idea. And then you see the movie, and it's an interesting thing. I wonder how the writers felt at that moment where they realized, you know, the crux of the story has to do with a virus developed in a lab, and the delay for that being centered. I mean, wouldn't you say it was delayed for that reason? It was touching too close to reality with what everybody was dealing with early on with
possibly. That's a
coronavirus.
very interesting point that you brought up because I don't think I necessarily thought that much about it until you just mentioning that. So it's very interesting that maybe that had something to do with
I
it.
wondered. I
Yeah,
wondered about like how these guys are trying to create and it looked fascinating, and we'll talk about it more, I'm sure. But that's just that you brought it up because it was delayed. It's a huge expenditure by the studio because of the time, because of the brand of 007 James Bond, and I mean, you can't help but draw the parallels, can you? I mean, just
yeah,
right
that's
off when you're putting it
fascinating.
together.
But then also too, I wonder how much of it then really I think would give that either more credence or less, or just even neutral, would be wondering how much of it was already put down in the sense of
Oh yeah.
how much they had already shot. Because unfortunately, a lot of these big blockbuster films, and I think I read somewhere where there was four different scripts that either came that essentially during the entire production of the movie, four different scripts came and went. And so I'm wondering how much got changed during the outbreak, or vice versa, how much of it was already established during the production. Because it's also too, if they were working on a timeline for the initial release, they would have been filming already a lot, or some of it was already in the can. And then even some of the scripts sometimes aren't even fully completed. They might have
Mm.
a rough a rough draft, or they might have, bits and pieces of it. But sometimes some of these scripts are even rewritten within the time frame of the production. So it'd be really interesting to see when the pandemic struck, how much of that storyline was already in place, and then yeah, subsequently what was adjusted or changed or unchanged. So it's a really interesting point that you brought up because I hadn't really thought about it, but I would not surprise me if you're right, if some of it was related to how close it, hit home.
Well, and I have to point out that I'm located in southern Louisiana, and at the time that the pandemic was really like say the first 6 months to a year, not to get off on the panty thing, but there was a lot of that group think of
Mm.
people thinking, oh, this is something that was done on purpose, and
Oh
they were
yeah.
blaming a specific nation for
Yeah.
that thing. And it really had this narrative to it. And I almost feel like if when I saw No Time to Die, and I loved the movie. I loved the movie. And I know that there was some
Nice.
controversy and people who may have felt differently about how they handled certain things in there, but I really enjoyed the movie. I really enjoyed what they did with Daniel Craig, and how Daniel Craig managed the character of Bond with the circumstance in the movie. I don't know how many spoilers we want to give away. It's been out for a while.
Yeah, we can
Um,
give all the spoilers. Yeah.
so yeah, I really felt like the centerpiece being this virus developed in a lab just felt like if it were released on time, people would have been like, "See, art
Yeah.
mimicking life."
Yeah.
They would have 100% tied those two together, right or wrong.
Yeah.
Not picking on anybody. I'm just saying I think that might have been a fear of the studio being like, we can wait until
Yeah.
this calms down a little bit.
But it's interesting too, because some of it might have just been coincidental. Because
Oh, for
this
sure.
some of it was a lot of people were saying if you rewatched Contagion, or was that the
12
movie
Monkeys.
12 Monkeys, how eerie it felt, rewatching it,
Oh,
like
yeah.
almost like we were these fortune tellers, so to speak, or as you said, art imitating life. So
The
it,
meme factories were going crazy with 12 Monkeys
yeah,
references. I mean, and I love that movie too. So I think where that connection came from is this why they delayed this movie?
yeah.
But
Well, and Charlie, did you watch it in the theater?
I did.
Okay. And was
I
it one
did.
of the first movies that you did see? Was it the first movie you saw in the theater?
It wasn't the first movie, but it
Okay.
was one of the first movies, mainly because my mother and my mom was a single parent for a good period of time. And one of the things that we would do, or that she would do, to kind of keep a young, precocious Charles in check was during the weekends, we would go and catch a couple of matinees. And
Nice.
in between them, we would always have like a restaurant style hamburger. Right?
Nice.
Like, we would go somewhere, sit down, have a hamburger, talk about the movie, break down the movie. My mother loves movies, and she passed that affection on to me. And I love the ritual of
Oh,
going to the
cool.
movie theater, and I love that whole experience. I have a real I have different expectations for different kinds of movies, for instance, and Bond was one of those films that I just felt compelled that I had to get my mom, who lives nearby, to go and see with me, and to enjoy a, a James Bond movie in the theater. And it was, I mean, it was fantastic. It was everything you would want it to be. And we've done that with other movies since, any title movie like West Side Story, that was one we went and saw. But Bond, those big films are things that I like to go back and relive that ritual experience with her. We don't go to multiple matinees, but we definitely went and saw Bond, had the popcorn, had the Cokes, and went and had a burger afterwards, just to kind of relive
That's
those same
awesome.
steps. But yeah, I saw it in the theater, and it was moving, moving.
That's so cool, because I always, it's very easy for me to forget that the theater experience, how much of an experience that is still for people, and hearing you speak about it being like a ritual that you kind of had for, when you're a kid or younger. It's just it's easy to forget that for some people the theater experience is something that they look forward to still today.
Oh, for
And
sure. I
yeah,
think people are missing out. And to be fair, on the other side of the fence, I don't know that every movie delivers on that. Right?
yeah,
There are definitely movies where I'm like, I'll wait, I'll watch that on Netflix,
yeah.
or I'll see that when it comes to my living room. But uh, movies like, I don't know how to. There's a lot of reasons, right? But when you have a studio putting that kind of money into production, it feels like the intent is to see it in that format, in that setting.
Yeah.
The best way to get the most out of it, to get the director's like intention, is to see it in the theater. And I almost feel I'm so appreciative of that kind of creativity and that kind of work that gets put into it. I almost feel like I'm indebted to do my end of it, right? I want to buy the
Mhm.
ticket. I want to go and eat the popcorn and watch the movie with just absolute astonishment and have it deliver the entire ride. The entire emotional ebbs and flows, and same thing with different kinds of movies deliver, whether that's action, excitement, horror, fear, fun, sadness, where you can feel in this movie, you know, something. I really felt like they did an amazing job at delivering something that no Bond film that I had ever seen had done, in seeing a character like Bond deal with personal sacrifice. And
Mhm.
that's I mean, I cherish those few moments of film. I feel like that's not the same if I were to watch it in my living room. I would still be connected and emotionally drawn, but it's not the magistry of seeing it on a huge screen with the right sound and enjoying it that way for
Yeah,
me.
that's fascinating because not to get too off the tracks, but it just kind of, as you're speaking, it's interesting. Then what's going to happen with this? Seems like this divide or this chasm that's starting to open up between the theater houses, and what's going to happen when,
Sure.
since everything is so much streaming now, or that seems to be the distribution channel. What is going to happen with the theater houses and that experience? What it's going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years? How drastically different it's going to be than what we've experienced before in the past.
I really hope that, um and no knock to any of the group of films that still garners that kind of ticket sales for theaters. I love the Marvel movies; those are great. It's fine. It's a different experience than Bond, and I feel like you need films like Bond. And to be fair, you need the small films to have a
Yeah.
theater presence as well. I just feel like that's a ritual maybe some of the younger generations just haven't had to connect with, right? It's everything is so on their phone,
Yeah, everything's so
or
accessible
it's
in
so
their in
accessible.
their in their phones and their devices that the movie-going experience isn't something that they're kind of introduced to,
Yeah, I
anymore.
agree with you. And I think that there is something missed when it could be the same movie. I think it's still a different experience seeing in the
Yeah.
theater. I really do.
Yeah, and I think, when I try to reflect on some of the greatest movie-going experiences that I've had, it seems like they did fit to that spectacle that you're talking about, the large screen, the sound, the communal aspect of it. So, and then yeah, it fits for some maybe presentations and maybe not so much others. It was really interesting too, listening to your guys' episode with Don and what he was talking about, what the potential could be coming down the pike,
Oh,
even just
sure,
as early
yeah.
as this year, about the studios actually buying up the theaters and they turn it into their own sort of you know personalized distribution theater house.
I don't think they want to lose that, and I hope they don't. I mean, No Time to Die being delayed didn't affect how many people went to see it. People wanted to see it in the theater, and it was kind of what I'm referencing. I think even for I mean, I don't think you had to have a mom that took you to the movies when you were a kid to appreciate again, the majesty of that movie going experience. It's incredible. It was incredible from the moment the film started rolling until the very end. And it wasn't a short, easy movie. I mean, the movie was, I don't fat with luxury. You know what I mean? You went to a
Yeah.
lot of different locations. You got to see And I mean, maybe this started with earlier Bonds like Skyfall, following the arc of those movies for this one storyline, following this Daniel Craig specific Bond.
Yeah.
No Time to Die really took you on a journey to through I mean, it's hard for me. I think you'll probably do better at describing how the kind of place it takes you with the character. I think maybe that's for me, it gave me a view of the man, not just the agent.
Mm, yeah.
I think
I,
that's what all those movies did to some degree, but this one really did. Really,
well,
really
and I
did.
think that's part of what Craig was able to bring. I think, like you were saying, like because he's had this journey with his character for this many years now, um, he did seem like much more. I wouldn't say emotional, but there was definitely some vulnerability. And I think a little bit what you were talking about towards the end, where the sacrifice. He did seem a lot more human. You know, you could see past that veneer a little bit of just the agent, more so in this film probably than in any of the other films. So yeah, it was very interesting. So I'm guessing then that it impacted you. Did you see it just the one time?
I've seen it more than once, but the first time I saw it in the theater, I
Okay,
didn't see it again in the theater.
fantastic, because it's very interesting. So what you've already expressed a little bit about it, and what was the first thing that you noticed about the film during that first viewing? You're saying it was very moving. What were some aspects of it that kind of just that
I
grabbed you, I
liked, I
guess?
mean, for me, the thing, there was a huge rumor mill before
Yeah.
the movie really released about new James Bonds and female James Bond. And, I think I was, for the first time, I think in most other Bond movies, my confusion about what was going to happen next came in the middle of the film.
Mm.
You could kind of assess what was going on early, but it was in the middle where you're like, okay, now what's going on? Where are we going to go? Where are they taking me? That feeling came at the beginning of this one. Starting off with you kind of wondering where they're bringing the antagonist character in sort of a flashback way. And you really, they did a good job of getting me on the edge of my seat early.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that didn't, that's not, and maybe I'm cutting out some great Pierce Brosnan version of the movie that I'm not remembering, or, or Timothy Dalton or something. But no, I mean, Roger, I mean, this is a Roger Craig. Yeah, I don't remember a movie having that mood. And I know other Daniel Craig ones had a mood, but there was always that very significant, uh, you know, Bond moment to kick it off kind of movie. And this one was much more, I don't know, somber,
Mhm.
darker, and not really sure what was going to happen from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I read too that this was the longest pre-credits or pre-title, intro in
Yeah.
all of the films. So yeah, it was like 24 minutes, I think, was the pre-title,
And
intro.
and the end of that 24 minutes, you're like, you're really wondering what the hell's going on.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that so did you off the bat, did you kind of then it seemed like it gripped you in the beginning. So did you have any sort of I want to say confusions, but were there any elements in the writing or in the movie that felt confusing or didn't make a lot of sense to you in that first viewing?
I want to, when I say, I'm going to say there was elements that were confusing, but I don't want to use that as like I'm saying something was wrong. There are certainly, there are
Yeah.
movies where I like that. Like I
Okay.
think that played into my overall happiness at the end of the movie.
Mm,
'Cause I don't need to know. I like a movie to trust the audience to go along with the story and wait for the answers to be given to them. because I didn't
Yeah.
put everything together in the beginning. I like that I didn't know, and I was able to remember the questions that I had at the after that first 24 minutes, and have it sort of carry through.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of what made the last, like the third act of the movie, felt like I was, at least for me, like things were occurring and becoming clear to me as they were becoming clear to the main protagonist, not
Yeah.
just Bond himself, but to the other 007, and to what was going on in the movie. Like I felt like that's, I don't know enough about writing to know how they could have managed to perceive that that was the case, but it felt at the end of the movie like that was the intention.
Yeah.
That it was supposed to be, the reveals were supposed to happen to me at the same time that they're happening to the characters on the screen, and that created I felt like a really unique experience for a Bond movie, because I don't know that that's really been the case. More so with Daniel Craig, but if you're a lifelong Bond fan, you can't, in my opinion, can't argue that that's something they've really pulled off. Like, you kind of know, here's what's going on. Here's the bad guy. How's he going to stop him? And then the surprise is how he stops him, right? Or something to that level. In this case, I really, it, like when it became clear to Bond what was going on, it was just becoming clear, I think, to the audience, and I really enjoyed that.
Cool. Yeah, it was very interesting because my experience with the film, it was so fascinating. This is why I'm very asking some of the questions, because it was so fascinating to experience when I first saw the film. And yeah, I did not see it in theaters, so I saw it at home.
Oh,
And
that's interesting to me.
yeah,
I'm
and it
surprised by that answer, actually. I'm surprised you didn't see it in the theater.
yeah, and I think it was a combination of because of the stuff I've been dealing with, but also too, I think the outbreak still happening. Um, Not going outside to the theater and kind of dealing with that whole thing.
Right.
I ended up waiting until it was available for rent, and I rented it and streamed it at home. And it was interesting because I watched it with my wife, and we the first viewing was almost, I didn't like it. I didn't like the
Really?
film. Yeah, I was kind of turned off by it. I think there was a combination of, it wasn't so much didn't understand, but it didn't there's this is the thing that I'm trying to like distill is, it wasn't so much an understanding of not knowing what's going on, but I think clarity in bits of information that a writer provides, whether it be, um, what was happening with, um, the element with the henchman. He's got this
Yeah.
eye, and then he's then showing up at this event. They're taking DNA samples. They're using this thing that this, you know, virus that they picked up. And there's these little elements that aren't necessarily, I'm not saying that you have to explain everything or, indulge your audience in huge amounts of exposition or, just dumb it down for them. You don't have to do that. But it felt like there was elements that were just not clear as to how the connections were being made. Like then all of a sudden he's showing up in this place, and what was he trying to get from this place? Like who was he? Why was he?
That's fair. No, I don't
Yeah,
know that. I don't know that that's unfair. I think you're right. When you're talking about a DNA based virus, like for if we haven't made that clear, if you haven't seen the movie, the virus is like oriented to a specific genetic marker,
yes.
and that is a big part of the movie, and it's a big moment of surprise when Bond shows up at basically the big gathering of evil geniuses. It's like the turn of events there is not quite what you expect, and it does kind of you're right, because they don't have that line where there's not a big reveal in the middle of the movie of the evil guy going, my genetically modified virus will do this. It's not
Yes.
like he's twisting his mustache and giving you the reveal on it. So you're right, there was some gray area for
And
sure.
it was like there was that one element too, and I didn't notice it too, because we're also, there was the scene where he then shows up, I think it was at Q's, and he puts in the thumb drive, and it's like, where did that fucking thumb drive come from?
Right.
And it's like, you didn't. And on the second view, it's like, oh, he picked it up from the ground when he's with the agent
It was a
at the,
passing moment.
exactly. And so it was like little things like that. The toothbrush was another thing. Like, if you hadn't catch that, like, they grabbed the toothbrush from Jamaica. So that was Bond's toothbrush. That's how they
Right.
were getting the DNA. And there, and also too, the whole, it didn't seem too like Felix when he asked him to another. This is one of the examples that I think I really keyed in on, when he asked him to, I need you, brother, to meet with this person, this contact.
Great actor.
Yeah, I love him, so good. But it didn't seem like the stakes were high enough. It just almost felt like that was put into place just so he could get to the next part, because then it was like, well, what is he really battling? Where's the obstacle? Other than him just saying like whether I'm gonna go or not. It's like there's no stakes essentially, because like it was almost saying, yeah, he's gonna go, just because he's got to go in order for us to get the plot moving to the next spot. There was no dilemma with him, like,
It was
am
just
I
a mechanism to move the
exactly,
plot
because
along.
when I think about it as a writer, what's my dilemma? The character needs to be in a damned if they do position or damned if they don't, because then that creates much stronger conflict and therefore more dramatic, or just drama, because then you're rooting for your character, but they have a shitty, they have two opposing choices that, then you're like, how are they going to resolve it? It's like, if they do this, they're fucked. If they do this, they're screwed. In that moment, it just seemed like, I need you to go. And then he calls M, and then he's kind of just looking outside Jamaica on his on his wonderful,
Right.
his wonderful palatial,
Right.
out in the middle of nowhere. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go.
Always
It's like,
beautiful.
it's like, really, really. So it was interesting. But then when I saw it the second time, I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I was going to. And so that's why I'm really grappling with this movie, because it had two distinct experiences for me. One, did not enjoy it, but then the second time I really did. And I think I picked up on a lot of those elements that you were talking about with Bond in that second
You were
viewing.
more forgiving of those things, but you're pointing out like legitimate, like flaws. It's interesting to me because, I'm talking about how I enjoyed those unknowns, but and this is, I think what I'm trying to, the thing that occurs to me based on what you're talking about with the thumb drive, with the toothbrush, with the DNA, and the virus based on DNA, I came into the movie so with my own personal knowledge that him putting the thumb drive in and there being the antics that come from what's on the thumb drive and the way that it affects Q's computer and whatnot.
Yeah.
Those, I took it for granted as a viewer that I can put together what's going on in that moment. And in a way that's a pleasure for me subjectively.
Yes.
As a viewer. I'm a bit of a computer geek. I can go, like immediately my brain is putting these things together. And the same thing with DNA or having any, and I'm not in any kind of medical professional field, but I am adjacent to one. I'm married to a medical professional. So I took it for granted, which I hadn't thought of until now, that was, I'm doing some of the work that I'm not sure the writers are right to have assumed the audience was able to do. Because I know, like speaking for my mother, who's a different generation of person and very, very smart, I had to explain that stuff.
Okay.
Right. And so I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking down to somebody who is not familiar with those things. But I distinctly remember in the theater going, oh, my mom was like, what's going on? And I had to sort of whisper over, okay, well, there's like a virus on that thumb drive. I'm having to explain what's going on. And I take it for granted that I'm able to fill in those gaps. And from a writer's perspective, I did not even consider how that's a a flaw
Yeah,
in
and it's very
storytelling,
yeah.
right? Because like the toothbrush and like somebody who has prior knowledge can come in, or maybe they've seen enough movies, maybe they've watched 12 Monkeys 13 times, you know what I mean? Like they have some idea of of the ability to put that story in and fill in those gaps where the writers but it's a lot for me to think that those writers were thinking of that or guaranteeing on that, right? That they're thinking, oh, the
Yeah.
audience will know. They can't possibly have thought that. So you're right. It's probably a completely valid criticism on them dropping the ball on some things that they're just expecting the audience to be able to look past. But I mean, what would you describe, like, from your point of view? Is that oversight? Is it laziness? Is it, like, what do
Yeah,
you
I
think?
don't think it's very interesting because I've thought a lot about it. I don't necessarily think it's because there was a I think it's a combination of what my critiques have been with big budget films, and especially with the Marvel, the MCU right now, is that because there's four credited writers on the film. Um, it's the director, and then Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She was brought in
Right.
to tighten up the script a bit and punch up the dialogue, and then two Bond staple writers that have done previous films. So it's not, I don't think, necessarily a lack of talent or knowledge. I think it's just it's the combination of it's almost sometimes where it's I kind of like it to engineering where you get these really smart people in a room sometimes, and it's very easy to over engineer something, you
Mm,
know, where
I like that. Good
they
analogy.
they are in the industry, they know how the sausage is made, but you can get a little too clever and a little too um, just a little bit too polished, you know, or trying to be too polished or trying to do things a certain way and not realizing that keep it fucking simple, you know, distill it, get down
G-
to just like the heart and the meat and potatoes of it, you know.
Good Southern parlance here is they're drinking their own Kool-Aid. Right. They're drinking their own Kool-Aid a little too much, talking about how good and tasty it was. Yeah, I kind of, it's interesting because it's changing my views of those plot mechanisms now. You know,
Yeah, because the thing is like my wife and I are sitting there watching it, and it's not like we don't understand. It's not like we can't understand what's going on.
right.
You know,
No, you're right.
you've got Bond, and you've got a film like Tenet. Now, there's a clear difference. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
it's easy to watch Tenet and be like, I don't know what the fuck is going on.
Yeah. Third viewing. Let me refer to my notes.
Exactly. Let me crack open the thesis. But you can understand what's going on, but then it not be clear of what the connectors are. You know, like there's a difference from it being technically sound and a difference between just kind of garbled. And I think
Yeah.
that's where this film fell in that for me, especially in that first viewing, is it was almost required a repeat viewing for me
Yeah. I
to
get where you're
kind of
coming from
make
now.
the connections and say, oh, you know, I missed the toothbrush on the first time, you know, or I saw the toothbrush, but I didn't make the connection that that's what they were doing
Why
with the
would you?
toothbrush.
Why would you?
Exactly.
What's interesting to me is for because the movie's long.
Yeah.
And
Which, yeah, it's a long movie. It's like the
it's a
longest
long
Bond.
movie, so it seems sort of ridiculous that that would happen at all.
Yeah.
If you have that much autonomy to make that length of a film, it would have been no issue to ask me to sit there for another 2 to 4 minutes to help explain the toothbrush and the thumb drive so it was clear to everybody. You know,
Or cut
and
something else out that didn't need to be
well,
in
there
there.
was a lot that could have been
Yeah.
cut out that didn't need. There was a lot. I mean, 100%. I mean, as much as I love the film, there was a lot that could have been left on the editing room floor in light of
Yeah.
being able to make my mom understand what was going on and me not have to whisper as clearly as possible to try to get her on the same page. But you're 100% right. I didn't think of it before, but I'm with you on that. I
Yeah.
am with you now.
And I'm sure it's like your mom, it wasn't like, because it sounds like the exact same thing my wife and I were like, wait a minute. Like we could, it's not like we didn't know what was going on, but the connection wasn't clear. We just didn't see the connection to what we were seeing. It was almost like it was unclear what the film was showing us and what the writing was doing. We're almost
Well,
at
and
odds with each other.
without that connection, the weird thing about the movie, because it is really long, is that there are most of the movie moves really quickly
Yeah.
from spot to spot to spot.
Yeah.
And if you like me reflecting on it now, for somebody like my mom, you're right. I mean, it just moves so quickly past those things
Yes.
that she really didn't know why things were happening that way,
Yeah, those
but
connectors weren't clear. It's
they
like,
weren't
oh,
clear.
this is why this is getting to the next, why we're going from here to here because of this connector.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're right on that. I had not thought of it before. It's funny because I'm already thinking in my head about how I'm going to go back to my mom next time I see her and be like, I remember I just talked, okay, I'm going to explain all and she's 100% going to agree with you because she found big points, I mean, multiple times in that movie
Mhm.
where she had to sort of tug on my sleeve and ask me for clarity.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the elements that was one of my questions, was what elements did you feel the writers got right and what was off? And I think that was a big case, was the writers didn't make those clear connections. It was almost like, yeah, we got to get to this place. We got to go to this place.
Do you think that that comes from them assuming, because I'm trying to be even keel about how I'm looking at it too, from just the audience member, and not having experience in the writing clearly, because I didn't think about that until you brought it up. But my mother is 83 and very sound, very sharp, but
Mhm.
83, that is still your audience. And it makes me wonder if the writers are writing for not writing for their full audience, right? Not understanding that that demographic is huge, huge. You know, you're talking a 50-year spread of ages of people. And so there's no reason to expect a 75-year-old person or an 80-year-old person to go, oh, yeah, thumb drive, it's probably got a corrupt file on it. You know, like there's no reason for that person to know. There might be more reason for a 30-year-old to know. So it makes me wonder,
Yeah,
like, who are they writing for? Like, who are they
yeah, and
assuming is watching the movie?
and I think that goes back to the part of there might be trying to be too clever or over engineering, not realizing that
Drinking their own
just
Kool-Aid.
exactly, distilling it to be a little bit more simpler, and it's not simpler, and again, I don't mean simple to be dumb. I just mean like
Clear.
clarity. Yeah,
Yeah, clear.
having clarity in what you're writing, and then translating that to what you're presenting visually. And I think
Well,
it's just I think it's the
y
machine sometimes. It's the machine that these big blockbuster films get crunched through, where some of that nuance gets lost because of either you have multiple writers on it, you've got a big budget that's moving at the speed of sound, just trying to meet, if their schedules are so condensed. And then also too the risk taking. Since you're talking about a billion-dollar franchise, there's certain risks that you're just not going to take. Um, yeah,
yeah, I completely am on board with you. It doesn't make me, uh, change my feelings on that first viewing, of course. I love that first viewing, but I
yeah.
completely think that did not occur to me on the multiple times I've seen the movie, but it does now, to the point where I kinda wanna go back and watch it with a more critiquing eye from that point of view,
Well,
because I think I would totally see the
but
way,
I think
like,
your well, it's interesting though. It's like your perspective too is very valid as well. When I was thinking about it, because I think that's why I was able to enjoy it more on that second viewing. Because then
yeah.
it's like it almost like I understood the connections now. They made more sense to me because I had watched it on a second and then subsequent third viewing, and I was able to then really take in what some of the stuff that you were talking about. Like Bond's journey. What was he displaying? Like what parts was he like showing his humanity and kind of like that his emotional. back and forth, and seeing him relate to some of the characters. Um, Now, instead of like, yeah, I was sitting there like trying to figure out how they got here to here, and I missed some of that nuance because I was thinking about how the fuck they got here to here.
Yeah, no, but it's not. Again, I'm gonna go back and watch it again to kind of be hard on my own uh, opinions on it. Not too hard, but I'll still love it. But I think you're right. I think it's worth being able to go back and see those things with a critiquing eye and understand where maybe something that I enjoy, which is I was referenced earlier, that I like movies that ask me as a viewer to do a little bit of work.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing all the time or every time. And I hadn't thought about that until this conversation. But because whereas I enjoy it, I don't think you really doing the story and possibly the character. If it's a one-off movie where it's not a staple or a
Yeah.
figure like Bond, that's a different thing. And when it's somebody like Bond, and using my lovely mom as a reference again, I kind of feel like where they may have done something that I really enjoyed, they in many ways kind of did her a disservice because I mean there were multiple times in that theater where I was having to sort of help catch her up. And if you ask me right now if that's something that should be the case, I don't think it should be.
Yeah, and
It shouldn't be.
that's what I think about a lot as I've been going through this process of trying to write this script is the audience. It's like, how is the audience going to see this and understand this? Am I being clear and
Wow.
concise?
Yeah.
Am I providing the information that's needed and then helping them take them on a ride? Like, are they going to enjoy it? Um, because they can either relate to it
Wow.
or it makes fucking sense, And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the biggest things too when I've talked with some friends that are writers is one of the biggest greatest critiques that we ask for is like when you're showing your writings to other people, some of the biggest question, and for me it's like the biggest question, it's not like did you like it or did you not like it, it's more of like did it make sense to you, was there anything that you were confused about, those are the questions that I want to know because then that informs where I can make my corrections, like yeah, this part happened and I couldn't follow, I understand why it happened, or such and such. Those are the most valuable feedback a writer can get because that's informing them where some of the pitfalls might be in
That
that
really
story.
shines a light to how difficult writing is because of
Yeah.
the unintentional fallout of marginalizing a demographic of your audience. Because I mean, that's kind of that is what we're saying. Because I mean, really, that movie for me, referencing No Time to Die, or even better, I'll do one better. You referenced Tenet earlier. I can tell you specifically, I have had a conversation with both my wife and my mother, knowing the kind of movie watchers they are, where they have asked me, "Hey, should I watch Tenet?" I've gone, no, no, you probably shouldn't bother. It's going to be difficult for you to put together what the hell's going on. It's going to be confusing for you. I love the movie,
Yeah.
but that that's got to be maddening. I hadn't, again, I'm not a writer, so I wouldn't have thought of it um, just by nature, but it really seems like a labyrinth. How can I make this clear to anybody who watches it?
Yeah, and it's really difficult because obviously you can't account for every single variable. And there's probably some people, like if I were to write a film, you might not like it because maybe it was too clear in the sense, like you were saying, you didn't get to work a little bit, to kind of almost
I think
break
I
it
get like
down.
that. I get like that when I'm not clear on the motives of the character.
Yes.
the motives on the character will get me frustrated, and or if I think the motives are just like a movie that I absolutely hate is, I think it's called Closer, and it is like Natalie Portman and Clive
Oh yeah.
Owen, and man, I watched that movie and I left that movie angry. I left that movie so angry for like an hour and a half, angry because I just couldn't identify with the motives of the characters at all.
Yeah.
And that maybe is why, like, marginalized against somebody like myself, I just couldn't attach to that. So I totally take your point. I think you're absolutely right about that.
So then my question, I'm very fascinated with how you felt Bond went through this journey, because you mentioned a couple of things about it. It was very moving for you, especially with this idea of sacrificing himself. Yeah, what expound a little bit on that, if you're able to, like what you got from him, like in this last trip that he took as Bond.
I think that I've always viewed Bond as being a character where nothing was bigger in his eyes than himself.
Mm.
And at
Really?
least,
Even the mission, even Queen and Country?
well, no, Queen and Country, I get it, but I felt like that's synonymous with the agent, right? The
Ah,
007, the agent.
okay.
That's the what he's always living up to, and it's always almost to a point where it's kind of a trope in humor when they make a spoof of Bond films, right? There's always going to
Mm.
be a way that that character gets away or lives or survives. It's not loss, but sacrifice. I'm not talking about losing somebody that's important to them, even though they did do a great job with this arc of films following Daniel Craig's Bond. You got to see more of that from the character. That's not unfamiliar. That's happened in other Bond generations, different actors. But this one felt more, earlier movies felt more real. Like you could feel that loss. And that loss is what drove
Mm.
him through these movies leading up to No Time to Die. The thing that stood out to me that I really enjoyed is that I thought, and I might be wrong here, I think it was a, at least for me, to some extent, unexpected and brave for them to bring Daniel Craig Bond to an end, to where he's facing his mortality and facing his demise in, and that's not what I expected. And I find,
Mm.
and I'm drawn, I mean, I'm sort of sentimental on movies that people do that. You can call it falling on the sword, or just accepting the inescapability of death. And that's
Yeah.
not something that they have. I would feel like that's really difficult to do with not only a great character, but with what they've built. We're talking 30 years of Bond, right? What it's built on and the premises that it's built on, to get it to a point where Daniel Craig is at a place where there is no secret spy submarine that he's gonna find his way to at the last second, and there's no, and the way that it's portrayed by Daniel Craig as an actor, the circumstance behind it, the acceptance that that character goes through, where that's almost like he's embracing it. That's where I
Mhm.
felt moved. I felt really moved by that. And maybe that swung my approvals to, all the standing ovation levels of satisfaction. I found it to be brave and interesting, and um I don't know. I could say a lot of things. I want to say I'm fascinated by that kind of thing because it surprises me that a studio would go, "Yeah, do it." And because we already know as an audience that there's a new Bond around the corner for any of them. There's always a new Bond, and I mentioned 3 or 4 other Bonds. It's like it went from Connery to Craig to Dalton to Brosnan to, it's like there's always there's going to be a new series, and there'll be still a new series, but in none of those cases and maybe I'm misremembering, certainly can be reminded that I don't remember there being this nobility and mortality combined inside of that character. And that kind of that really struck me. The imagery was beautiful too. I love the was it a bunny? Was it the
Yeah.
bunny he's got in his belt, and
Yeah.
he's just beat to hell and weathered and just the look on the character's face, I felt was uh just beautiful, man. Beautiful film.
Fascinating, and I really appreciate that perspective on it. And I say that because I almost had the exact opposite reaction to that scene. And it's just interesting to hear that perspective because, I can totally see it, but I don't know how to resolve it for myself because some of it I feel like it it diminished him in a certain way
Hmm.
where it almost felt like the sacrifice maybe was empty. But
Hmm.
I understand what you're saying about the character being able to express something that typically has never been able to express, the nobility, the humanity. It was always just like the agent, the incomparable, you know, 007 who can't be harmed. He's just this larger than life figure that will just live until the end of time. Um, but it was interesting. It was almost like kind of a letdown for me that the way and I don't know if it was because too I might have a bias, especially with Han Solo. This whole
Oh,
like where they're
right,
just like,
right,
just kill them
right.
off, man. Just they're so over it. They're so over the mythos. They're so over just
Well,
how big it is, and they're just like, just kill me off. Just let me go out.
like
Like, taking Lassie
yeah,
out by the shed, the
I
old
can see
letter,
that.
old
But
Yeller, and
like
just,
the Han
send
Solo
him to
thing
doggy
is a good
heaven.
example, though, right? Like, because I think that the thing that got me was sort of the fact that he seemed like he was so burdened with the losses that he had to bear that I just wouldn't have expected that particular version of Bond to ever get to a point. You see, you know
Mhm.
what I'm where that was ever gonna like. It just didn't come across to me as what I would have thought, even
Yeah,
during the movie, that particular movie, but definitely the movies before it, and for sure, with the way that the Bond franchise is operated, I just
yeah,
would not have predicted that. So I think the like shock and guffaw of like, oh my god, they're actually going to do this.
yeah, they're not trying to kill him off.
Oh my god, like, and then the way they handle that. Now, I would have been really disappointed if that were like if the story had changed to where the uh the bad guy kills him and then the island gets destroyed by the artillery fire or whatever. I think it was from,
Yeah,
that would have been like, oh well, okay. I would have been upset about it. Was really that couple of minutes that they show him having to digest it and giving it to him to say, do it. Like, I think
yeah,
it was, and I'm only speaking for myself. I am certainly not. I don't know enough about writing, or I can, like, after this conversation, I can completely see where that's. I can understand where that would be a letdown, but from my personal own stake, and I've totally admit to being um, sweetheart about that kind of thing, right? Like, you get
oh
me to
yeah,
any
yeah, yeah,
movie like that, where like
yeah,
the Dead Poet Society, where the old Captain, my Captain
yeah,
moment, I'm definitely like just teary eyed and crying over it,
yeah,
and
you go, man, you
right,
go.
right, so I really like that sacrifice, and that
Yeah,
really, for in a weird way, it sort of gave him, and I'm 100% plugging in my own stuff here. But for me, watching that moment made him that soldier jumping on the grenade,
yeah,
right? That moment of inescapability that if I would have been asked about it before seeing the movie, I just wouldn't presume that Bond would be the kind of guy to go, yeah.
Yeah.
jumping on the grenade. I would expect him to say, no, I'm going to hit this button on my watch. And like I would not have expected that kind of sacrifice from any Bond. And then of course they tie it into his own, about it being, so it kind of hits a bunch of buttons, right? And then maybe that's just a trick on the way that they edited or wrote it, is he's doing it for himself, he's doing it for his family, he's doing it for God and country, he's doing it for the earth and for everything. And I don't know, man. I had a note for me, and to speak from my mother, who's been an unwilling and unknowing participant in this conversation. I mean, we were both sobbing, and felt the gravity of it, and I think that's juxtaposed to everything we think we know about Bond. So maybe that was a trick or like a mechanism to get us there. And if that's the case, it totally worked. I don't think it changes how we felt in that moment and the affection we had for that story, right? We came out exhausted because I think that's the maybe the mind, the head trick of it is that my mother and I came out of it feeling like we sacrificed something. Which we didn't, but you know what I'm saying? Like we totally felt like, oh, we gave him up for the greater good, but that is part of what I felt. But I completely see what you're saying, though. Like I can see what you're saying about it.
Oh, and I see what you're saying too. Is like obviously, it had an effect on you, and then if that was the writer's intent, then obviously that got through.
But they knew Daniel Craig didn't want to make any more movies either, right? Yeah. Like that.
Well,
I totally understand.
Daniel Craig was giving him the wink, wink, nudge, nudge of like, hey, it'd be really great right here is if I can go out in a blaze of glory.
You're 100% right.
Just have him on top, just looking up at the sky and just giving up the ghosts.
This is starting to make me think of like Young Guns 2, right? Like they're all like, ain't nothing better than a group of pals, and they all go out in a blaze of glory. And it's like Q Bon Jovi. Totally just like in the moment. That's totally funny, man. You're right.
And so, it just made me think of, if there was a way, and I think that's probably why I'm grappling with the script that I'm grappling with, is where does, it's kind of one of my final question was like, where does Bond go from here? And it's kind of like what you were saying is showing something that you didn't think that Bond could go to and being able to see that side. And
well, on that end, I take your point, man. I don't know where they go, regardless of how they change the character. If they make it a British black female Bond, I don't know how I think you almost go back to what it has always been before this moment. I don't know that you can ever do this anytime soon again.
Yeah. And I think that's probably why I wouldn't say, again, it wasn't that I necessarily thought it was bad. I guess it was really interesting. Like I've still been trying to grapple with it. Is did I feel like it was a letdown because it didn't what's the word I'm looking for? It didn't show me anything new about Bond? Or was it that it didn't seem like it was earned? Maybe that's the better way to say it.
Oh, wow.
That the sacrifice wasn't earned. It was almost like they did it because it was like you might I think mentioned it was the trope to do. Like I guess that's the only best way I can explain it, because I think it goes back to the writing where why I had such big issues with WandaVision was her quote unquote freedom from that reality she created wasn't earned, or that she got to walk off in the sunset, but all the consequences that the other people that she enslaved had to experience, there was no consequence for her actions. It was
That's really
maybe a little bit similar with Bond. It's like
It is it is a bow, right? You're right.
Did he
His
make the choice
demise.
because he wanted to make the choice, or was he almost coerced into making that choice because there was no other option?
There
You
was
know?
no other option. No, you're absolutely right.
So
It
was
does.
that sacrifice really earned then? Because it was almost like he was just becoming more acceptance of quote unquote the mortality that it was almost like basically the luck had run out.
He didn't go there like he didn't know that going there. You're absolutely right. It
Exactly.
occurs. That is undeniable. It occurs there in that last few moments where and everything I'm praising about that really isn't the writing. It's how that character and him as an actor displays his embracing of
And
that
I'm wondering
finality.
then if I would have
That's
felt what you
interesting.
felt if I felt that that was earned.
You're right. You're right. Like
Maybe I would have
yes.
been like, "Holy shit, good for
If he
him."
decided to go there knowing there was no escape.
Yes.
You're right. Hands down. I agree with you. I have to agree with you. Yeah, I'm not taking away from the performance or the emotional moment of him as
Me
or the
neither. Yeah.
character. That's one thing. But you're right. As far as the writing and the way that they get him there, he doesn't know. And even to the very end, he's trying to escape. He's
Yes.
trying to bond his way out of it. And you're accurate. And in that from that perspective, it's worthy of criticism. Really.
Because then when you see, "Oh, Bond will return," for me, it felt a little comical. It's like, "What are you talking about? You just killed him off."
Right,
Like,
right. Well, like,
but if I'm sitting
yeah,
there wiping
yeah.
tears from his eyes and he's like, "How is Bond gonna
Don't
return?
give up on the franchise. We
Don't give
still need your money. We're gonna
up."
bring you some more content.
I wonder if I would have been a little I wonder if I would have been a little bit more gut punched. It was like, "How is he gonna come back?
Yeah,
He was so loved."
if he knew this was a one-way ticket, and he didn't. I mean,
He didn't. He
clearly,
didn't until that end when he
he
got
did not know.
basically he got bamboozled, essentially. It was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, I cut you. You got the fox die in you now."
yeah. No, you're right on. And it really tells you how in the bag I was emotionally
Oh, they had you,
to
man. They had
they had
hook,
me.
line, and
They
sinker.
had me. I was just like, I was completely like
You're just flopping
halfway.
around.
Yes, I was in the sappy part of it. Like he's yeah, for honor.
Oh, God,
Yeah, you're
you
totally
go,
right.
Daniel.
I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker. Again, it was they could have just said, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," and they would have just had me. You're 100% right.
And they
You're
could have
100%
cued
right.
The Bon Jovi music right as he's going up the stairs.
In a blaze of glory. Yeah, you're right. It totally it almost it's funny to me because it makes me think of that moment of a total like look and evidence to the other things that you referenced like the thumb drive like the toothbrush it's a plot mechanism quite likely right that they put there at
Yeah,
the end and they pull on the heartstrings and mine were just ripe and thick ready for pulling and I totally went in and I tell you I'll probably watch it more several more times and I'll still get sentimental but I'll be more aware of those shortcomings and they're kind of indefensible. They are shortcomings. They are. I mean, they are. He does not know it's a finality for him. And by the time he does know, I mean, I guess what else could have happened besides
exactly.
writing it to where he handles it the way he does? I mean, it would not have been a
Yeah.
good movie if he's like, God damn it, I can't believe it. No, why? Where's my Bond
Oh, God,
sub?
yeah.
They
Yeah.
fucked me. They totally fucked me. Yeah, it would have been. It would not have been a good movie.
He almost tries to bond his way out too when he calls Q, and he's almost saying like, "Hey, you sure there's not a way out of this?"
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. He is. He's like, well, I guess I better handle this gracefully because there's a camera in my face.
Yeah, and I'm on the
So
phone.
let me just put this bunny in my belt line here and make it look good. You know, I bought it. I bought it. I'm
And
guilty.
yeah,
I
I
bought it.
don't discredit like Daniel Craig. Like I totally agree with you too. I felt like it was some of his most emotional and humanistic, Bond
I
that
got
he's
caught in the
done.
performance of it. I really did.
Well,
And
he
I
did a
was
good
not.
job. I was really feeling for him. I did. He hit some great moments, like you were saying, that where you just kind of like he's got that look in his eye, and you're just
But
like,
it
ugh.
beckons the question for me: is it fair to I mean, like? I almost feel like if I were to have a question with Daniel Craig, it would be: do you have like beef with the writers for putting it on you to save the script, to save that writing? Like, because in a sense, you'd have to know he'd be aware of it, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he agreed with the points that you're making, where they would have had to do a lot more work to not use these mechanisms to move the plot along, or put him in that situation to make it seem like he knew he was embracing it before he ever goes.
That's the wonderful unknowable question that I have. I think when I see a lot of films, how much of of control, especially for somebody in his position who's, is Bond, and this is his last film, and is obviously built relationships with the people that
Wow,
are kind of
man.
steering this ship, and how much say he did, or if he didn't see it either, if
Or if he was just unhappy about it going in and knew, I'm just going to put out this great performance and hopefully it'll
yeah,
work.
maybe, because I feel like a lot of times that's what happens, where the script is the script and there's too many cooks in the kitchen, or you don't want to necessarily, or why there's quote unquote creative differences, because and that's what happened, right? Danny
Yeah.
Boyle, he was the one that was going to initially direct the film, and then I think he wrote a draft or whatnot, and they said no.
Yeah, it really does seem like the like it's
And Star Wars.
understandable and believable to me that he would be like, I've got to perform in a way that's true to the way I see Bond going out, even if it's not what the writers have put together for me.
Yeah, because it's like it's you gotta, especially too, again, how much sway did he have, especially at that
Wow.
point. And
Wow.
yeah, it's very fascinating to me, like how that process works. And obviously, I don't have any experience in it yet directly, so a lot of it is just kind of what I pick up from other tales and
I'm
stuff
so
from other
interested to
people.
see this movie again. You've cracked my brain wide open, bro. I'm serious. I'm gonna be pointing this stuff out to my mom. Look at toothbrush. You see it? Like my conversation is gonna be totally different if my mom and I watch it again. Just gonna be shaming her. I'm gonna be like, we're both such suckers. We're such softies. We totally bought it. So funny.
Because I mean, too, like look at the villain. How much of the short end of the stick he got. It was that the villain has always been such a problem with these big blockbusters.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
just, it was just talk about a plot point. He was literally just in there for a plot point. Had no development. Had no sense of urgency or threatening menace. It's just,
You're starting to really pull this together in a way where I'm looking at the actors as having saved the movie. I
a
mean,
lot of times
truly,
they do, like
because
they
like Rami
or
Malek is an incredible actor. Christoph
yes,
Waltz is an incredible actor.
and
It
they
feels like those guys were all on the same page. Like we got to deliver. We got to deliver because if we don't, there's going to be a lot of criticism. If they had
well,
done anything less than a great performance, it would have
yeah.
been
And
terrible.
see, that also, I think, also shows how talented they are, because even Al Pacino can't save a terrible script, but
Fair,
they can make it seem where it's not the train wreck that it might actually be. They can
man.
pass it off as something that, oh, that wasn't bad. That wasn't bad. Or it was like, oh, that movie was terrible, but fucking Al Pacino was great. It's
Right. Well,
like,
yeah. No. You
yeah.
make a strong point, man. I mean, it's interesting because I'm telling you, I won't say that I'll love the movie less, but I'll definitely look at it again and be like, "This Tony told me about this." Like, I'm in class right now. I'm in class right now. I'm gonna go back and sound like I know what I'm talking about when I watch it with somebody else watching. I'm gonna say
Well, I
things
think,
like
but it's
plot
hard though.
points and
Well, it's hard though now, because I feel like it's kind of like, yeah, when you know this how the sausage is made, it's difficult for you to just kind of enjoy certain things
right,
anymore.
which
Like,
just makes sense from what you were saying. You watched it the first time. I understand more of what you're saying now, where it's really difficult for you to watch a movie the first time through and not be able to pick apart where they didn't deliver on the writing side.
Yeah. And I think too, also obviously I have a bias because I like the franchise and the character so much. It's more devastating to me because I want it to go places where I don't think it can, or I want the best for it, you know? Like I want it to do well. I want it to be great.
It,
And I
can it
get
be argued that the writers know that about the audience and know that that's going to do them some favors, maybe?
yes, but then you get Star Wars Force Awakens. Then you get something, then and that's my point with the MCU specifically, is that then you don't take a risk anymore. The reason why Iron Man worked so well was because it had never been done before, so
And
they
they
had to go
didn't know
all
if it
in.
was going to work, right?
They didn't know it was going to work. For them, it was like, we got to do everything we can to make this just a great film, not cater to an audience. We just got to make it the best film we can possibly can. And then it's become too big. It's been too big to fail. Now they can't take that same risk
Not without
because
it being a new IP, right?
exactly.
Yeah, they
Or
can't.
not without because it's there's too much invested in it now. There's too much, like with Iron Man, yeah, it was an expensive movie still, but it wasn't hinging on $1 billion franchise.
We got to get
And
together and talk about Moon Knight and see what you think about that. I'd love to see, because we just need to talk about the television series as a whole, whether it's WandaVision or Moon Knight or Loki, or I'd love to get your input on those when we have another
yeah, I would
like
love it
something
too.
else to talk about, because those I'd love to get your input on the writing on those.
Yeah,
I
and a
really
lot
would.
of I think that's my criticism a lot is that they're not taking the risk anymore. That's why I find it when I look back, and I'm gonna rewatch them again soon, is I look back on the Russo brothers and what they did with the Infinity War, the Infinity Gauntlet is just mind blowing to me. Because if you go back and watch those two movies, what they were able to accomplish with those two movies, I don't know if it ever can be done again.
Well, that's my
Because
praise too. I don't know
they
if it'll
were
ever be.
able to take risk with that movie while still make it a good movie, but cater to a wider audience. And that is just it's near impossible to do because you have to have all the right. You have to have the stars aligned perfectly. You have to have the right directors. That's why Star Wars has had a hard time with getting talented directors because they all run up against the executives who are like, no, 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 you can't do that. You got to stay. You got to stay
Well,
safe.
you can't take risk, right? You got to deliver
Exactly.
on. Yeah, I completely see where you're coming from. I do, and and with Marvel, my only thing I'll say, just specifically to those last two Avengers movies, is that's the only movie going experience I've ever had where I, I mean, the energy in the room was like we
Yeah.
were at a concert.
Electric.
It was, I mean, the
Electric.
sadness, everybody was just in the gutter. The excitement, like when Steve Rogers picks up Thor's hammer, people stood up with their hands in the air like an overtime touchdown was scored in the Super Bowl. Like it was insane. It was
Yeah.
just insane, and I don't know if I'll ever feel that again, but that is also my big their roller coaster rides, and the theater delivers on that. You don't get that from the screen at home.
Yeah.
You just do not.
And just like, what they're able to do with the risk of killing off half of the MCU and then specifically in Endgame where they kill off Thanos right in the beginning and you're just like, whoa. Like
Here's a
again,
return of my mother here for you in Infinity War, which is filmed very much like a horror movie.
mhm,
There is towards that last 10-15 minutes of the movie where Thanos is just stalking everybody one by
yeah,
one, that my mother, we watched this at home with her. They were great. Her and my stepfather were great sports about going through the entire MCU catalog up to those movies. My mother at a point in that movie had to stop. I mean, was so caught up in that moment emotionally that she just stopped. She was like, "I have to stop. I can't do it. I can't do it." No, she was literally like not screaming, but like pleading no to the movie. You know,
Yeah.
no, no, no. And I was like, okay, let's stop. And we had to go
Yeah.
back and watch the last 20 minutes later. And I feel like that's a great. To me, that was a example of great movie making, and much
Yeah.
like No Time
Amazing.
to Die, seeing her put finality to that character was special. And it was for
Yeah.
me too. I know we're criticizing the writing, rightfully so, which I wasn't aware of prior, but um, kudos to Daniel Craig. I mean, it delivered on an experience that was
Yeah.
emotional, and I felt like I was there with that character. And I think that, I wouldn't have said this before, but after uh, truly being like mind blown by you and your expertise on this, it seriously feels like more credit has to be given to his performance.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think he was one of the
100%.
phenomenal Bond. Definitely brought a lot to that character for sure. Brilliant, man. Oh, I appreciate you stopping by, hanging out
This
with
is
me, and
fun.
chatting. Yeah,
Anytime.
it's so good.
Anytime.
I,
Anytime, any movie, any show, I'm ready to learn. Teach me, teach me. I'm ready to be a Padawan.
well, I think probably why it's good. Like it kind of sanes me a little bit, like because I've been banging my head off this Bond script for fucking years, but it's like it just makes me feel a little bit better. Like, yeah, this shit is fucking hard. So I'm not just being ridiculous. Like I'm trying to find the angle to make it, on that level of an end game or an Infinity War, because I want to see the stories that I want to see from Bond, and it's how do
Well,
you do
you're
it?
literally trying to. I mean, I kind of see it as you're trying to create this universal appeal, and that's just. I mean, is there a more impossible task? I mean, especially with so many things being subjective.
Yeah,
Not that it's better or worse, but if you're talking about the exposure and wide appeal, or embracing from a wide audience, I mean, you're trying to fit so many different perspectives and to be clear to so many different ways of perceiving a story, that
yeah,
if you miss out on something, and I mean, it really stands to reason that if you have that kind of budget for something like Bond, and you're
hmm,
not clear about something like the
yeah,
toothbrush, or you're not clear about something about the thumb drive, and you don't have him really starting to go through the process of embracing the finality of it earlier on in the storyline, and you're just using those plot mechanisms, man, I mean, it is hard and complicated, more complex. What my favorite, like, it might be simple to say I want it to appeal to a wide audience, but that's not easy. That is not.
no,
That is a multifaceted, like, giant Rubik's cube. Like, it's that seems a gargantuan task, and you seem like you're up for it, man, because you're able to pick apart things and know where they are falling short in a way that I have learned from in the last 90 minutes. Like, really.
well, and I think that's key what you said, because I think what you're talking about is universal. So again, that's why it's like I think sometimes writers will try to be too clever, or get too clever and over engineer, and not think about what is universal. And I think that's why when you think about in the Daniel Craig era, why was Skyfall? I think Skyfall edges out Casino Royale just a bit, I think, as like everybody's favorite
Yeah,
Bond in
that's
the
one of my
Daniel Craig.
favorites. Yeah, for sure.
And when you think about it, why? And I think one of the tenets of it was because of the relationship between him and M at that moment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I think that's why some of it was lost for me in the subsequent movies, is the relationship. And I think that's probably why also his, quote unquote sacrifice didn't hit as much for me, is because what was in relationship to? That's why I think that M's death hit everybody so hard, and especially Bond, is because of the universal aspect of that. People could easily relate to that.
That was
And
great
so
writing.
that's kind of like what I'm thinking about. I have an idea in, I think, for my script, but I think that's because of the key that I'm keying in on is a relationship of a character that he has in the film. And so I'm hoping that's what's going to make it universal, because people would be able to easily relate to that.
Well, and also, like I said earlier about something I struggle with, it gives you such ability as a audience, as a viewer, to identify with what's driving that character,
Yes.
what the motive is.
Yes.
And
Yes.
without that, or if that's confusing, or if you wonder why, that can take away from great
Yeah.
writing or great story for me.
Because you're wondering why. Why am I watching this character? What's so
can't
important?
Answer that question unless that's given to you. You can't interject your own thoughts into it. You just can't.
Yeah.
You're waiting for that, and if it's not there, man, I mean, I have a hard time letting go of some of those frustrations. Going back to that horrible movie, Closer. I mean, I was upset for like 2.5 hours. Angry. I was angry. I was like, I had a friend of mine who loved it, and I was like, "Are you just a shitty person because you identify with these shitty people, or like help me understand?" And she couldn't. Right. And of course it wasn't fair for me to ask that of her, but it was more like it was not clear to me why they were doing what they were doing.
Yes.
And I'm with you. I think that is almost more important to me than almost anything is knowing, because even with the stuff we've picked apart with Bond, I kind of knew why he was there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But wow, dude, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank
really
you.
Fun. Really great.
Thank you, Triple C. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, dear listeners. You've been listening to Ruminations on Tony's Tall Tales, a production of Ruminations Radio Network. Please take this moment to subscribe, rate, review our show, and I would love to connect with you on social media at Tony's Tall Tales. Visit www.ruminationsradionetwork.com for additional great shows such as Triple C's Brevity Box, Retro Futurist Culture, Cinephile Hissy Fit. Oh God, it hurts. Man, they've been all great. Ruminations of Red Rum.
Thank you, Mitch.
So good. Thank you, Mitch. And then for all your burning questions and passionate feedback, drop us a line at ruminationsradio@gmail.com. Cheers.
Later, guys.